Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Development Control. Welcome to new members and old members, and young members and old members. So, fire evacuation procedure. There are no fire alarms scheduled for this evening. Therefore, if the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately. The fire exit is located at the rear of the room. Go down the stairs and meet in the Memorial Park. Members, please note the meeting is being webcast live on the internet, and mobile phones, if you could turn them off or to silent, please. That one out of the way. Okay. For the benefit of members of the public, who we haven't got any here yet at the moment, watching or participating in this meeting, I would like to explain who everybody is. My name is Councillor Nick Robinson and I'm Chairman of this committee. To my right are councillors who will be making the decisions on the agenda applications for this evening. To my immediate right and left are officers who will be presenting the applications and providing advice to the committee. The Development Control Committee is a regulatory committee, not a political meeting. The committee will be considering the published papers, examining the evidence brought before us tonight, and will make decisions based on planning reasons. We are guided by national and local planning policy and guidance. At the appropriate time, I will invite speakers to contribute to the meeting in the order set out on the update paper. May I ask all speakers, including visiting members, to speak clearly and keep points made to the application on material reasons only. No further dialogue between members of the committee and speakers will be permitted once questioning has finished. All speakers will be reminded of their permitted speaking time and will be advised when they have 1 minute remaining. May I ask all committee members to avoid repetition and keep any comments on each planning item to a maximum of 4 minutes. This evening, I think there are 7 items on the agenda, and I really hope to be able to complete it within 3 hours. I understand that planning can be emotive and ask that everyone remains polite and professional throughout this meeting. Councillors wishing to speak as a ward member should indicate so at the declarations of interest. They will leave the meeting for that item and will not be able to vote. Due to the current restrictions, I would like to remind everyone of the following procedures. Face masks must be worn at all times when you are not seated, unless you have a relevant exemption. Due to the limited capacity with the public gallery, to ensure social distancing is maintained, it will be necessary for the public to the council chamber to be brought in on an item by item basis, so there may be a short pause between items. If any member leaves during an item, they will not be allowed to vote. Thank you. So, first on the agenda, apologies for absence and substitutions. I have got Councillor McCormack sitting in for Councillor Freeman. Correct. Any others? No, thank you. Item 2, appointment of a Vice Chairman for the year. And I would like to propose that Councillor Paul Harvey is elected to that position. Councillor Frost. Thank you. It's been proposed and seconded. Could I have a show of hands who's in favour, please? Thank you. I think that is carried unanimously. Paul, would you like to come and join us? Thank you, everyone. Good start to the meeting, everybody agreeing with each other. Urgent matter, declarations of interest. I have Councillor Goderson, I believe, is standing down for item 3. Is that correct? And you'll be speaking as a borough councillor.
Yes, I'll be speaking as a ward councillor, but not very He needs to move to the back.
Yeah, can you all use your microphones, please? Because obviously it doesn't go out on the web.
Just make sure Sven knows he's got to go into the public.
Is that when it goes red? Yes. Yeah. Okay. I will be. Yes. I feel I might well be considered to be conflicted on item 3, so I will be leaving the meeting for that item and speaking at that item as a ward councillor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Godison. And at that time, you will be moving over to your right into the public speaking gallery. Thank you. Urgent matters, as far as I'm aware. Sorry, Councillor Hussey.
Sorry. Item 7, the 4 Fairfields Road. I'm the ward councillor, so I will not be voting, but I may speak as ward councillor, as a resident who lives in the ward.
Can you make that decision now? Will you be or not?
I will stay silent.
Councillor Frost.
Thank you very much, Chair. It's just on item 1. I just want to make it known that last year I used to be the ward member. I am now the ward member for Tadley North, Borkhurst and Kingsclear. I am very open-minded on this subject, okay, but I just wanted to make it known, okay, that I used to be the one of the ward members.
Thank you for the clarity. And Councillor Gaskell.
I just want to declare that I am actually the ward councillor for item 1.
Okay, legal have just advised me you don't actually need to declare that you're a ward councillor unless you wish to speak as a ward councillor, so it's one we can take forward for the future. Thank you. No others? Good. Right, minutes of the meeting held on the 28th of April. Obviously quite a few people weren't there. Could I have a proposer? Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Sorry, okay. Yeah, did I miss that? Okay, I'll do that in a minute. And is there a second? Well, I'll second. All right, Councillor Tomlin. And is everybody happy with those minutes? Yes. Yep. Okay, I'll sign those at the end of the meeting. And apparently, I missed urgent matters. So, I've no urgent matters. No, so that's done. Excellent. Applications for planning. And first item, we have no public speakers, so officer to introduce.
Thank you, Chair. This is a full application for the erection of 7 dwellings with associated parking, turning, landscaping and private amenity space with the creation of new access point onto Popham Lane. There is no update, as the Chair has mentioned. The site lies outside a settlement policy boundary, but as you will see from the location plan, it does sit sandwiched between a terrace of properties and the Wheatsheaf, which is the adjoining site to the south, which is currently under construction, having benefited from planning permission for residential development.
Chairman, I can't hear a word. We can't hear.
I can't get. Okay, is that any better?
A bit better. Is that ventilation noise in the background here?
Yeah, sorry, I haven't spoken to people for months. Yeah, so would you like me to start again?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Okay, so it's a full application for the erection of 7 dwellings with associated parking, turning, landscaping and private amenity space, together with the creation of an access onto Popham Lane. The site lies outside the settlement policy boundary, but is situated within a row of a linear form of development, sandwiched between a terrace of cottages at Portland Place and also the Wheatsheaf site. The two sites to the south of this application site have the benefit of planning permission for residential development. This would be a cul-de-sac form, similar in nature to those which have permissions. So whilst the proposal doesn't meet our policy SS6 in terms of new housing in the countryside, it nevertheless is not considered to be isolated, and obviously given the Council's 5-year housing land supply position, the principle of development is considered acceptable.
Sorry, Chair, I still can't hear. Every time you turn your head to the side, there's not enough volume for me.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Okay. So the report sets out a number of key issues, and it's a very detailed report. It addresses all of those matters in terms of impact on character of area, design, highways, flood risk, trees, landscaping and heritage. It also includes a section on nitrate neutrality. This is where a separate piece of land to the southwest of the site is to be set aside in order to make the development nitrate neutral. This would be secured by a Section 106 agreement to ensure that that land would be retained, managed and mitigated to cover that issue in perpetuity. The recommendation is therefore for approval subject to that 106 agreement and also the conditions listed within the main agenda.
Thank you, Lisa. There's no public speakers, so questions to the officer. Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Chair. I would just like to have officers' understanding of how they see this piece of land that's being set aside and how that will be managed for in perpetuity. Is this going to be a management company that's set up, or is it a question of doing something something different? Thank you.
Yes, the applicant will need to submit, as part of that 106 agreement, there is a woodland mitigation plan, which will include a monitoring and maintenance strategy. So we don't have those details before us. That would be enshrined within the 106, which is yet to be completed.
Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Chair. Just to come back, I would like to see, okay, in the Section 106 agreement, enough monies to actually ensure that the residents of these houses aren't actually going to be approached for any sort of management fees towards this nitrate neutrality.
No, I don't believe that to be the case. I think the burden will be entirely with the applicant.
Last one, Councillor Frost.
Sorry, Chair. I kind of I went round last weekend and actually had a good look at this site, and I'd like to say thank you very much to the officers for the nitrate neutrality answer to my question. But the other question that I have is on the access and the visual displays, which is on page 57. Okay, second paragraph up, and I'm just wondering whether there is a condition that, along with the nitrate neutrality, that what we can do is ensure that those visual displays are maintained. Again, I would like it for in perpetuity, but you know, I'm not sure whether the applicant would sign up to that.
Yep. So if you look at page 67, condition 8. Requires the provision, before any of the dwellings are occupied, the provision of the visibility displays shown on the submitted plan. And at the end of that condition, it says, these shall thereafter be maintained in such condition. So again, that would be down to the developer to ensure that those are maintained.
Thank you, Chair. Final question, and then I'll be quiet, honestly. I did read, page 67, but I didn't feel that the condition kind of went far enough. And I'm just wondering whether there is anything we can do to bolster that condition in the Section 106 agreement.
No, that wouldn't be reasonable to include something like that within the Section 106 agreement. This is a condition recommended by the Highway Authority, which we use over and over, and is a fairly standard condition, which you will have seen on many planning permissions. It's not something which would be necessary to meet the tests to be enshrined within a Section 106.
Thank you. Just for the future, I will be insisting on a strict code of only 2 questions. I think you got away with it this time. It won't be happening again. So, Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the question I've got is if you could offer some clarity to me. On page 58 and 59, we're talking about parking. The site does seem, challenged on potentially on parking, and the comment about not parking in Popham Lane and brick walls being built to dissuade people from doing so. That means the parking will be on site. And we have a comment on page 58 that says the garages are too small for our standard, and so they cannot be considered to provide a parking space. Whereas on page 59, we then go on to say that the spaces will be provided, and some of these will be provided with within the garages. So I'm just seeing a little inconsistency there. If you could possibly explain your understanding. Thank you.
Yes, I think, as you know, our parking standards require much larger garages, and they normally incorporate an element of space for storage. So I think we've sort of done a sort of average assessment, and there will be some vehicles which are obviously large that probably wouldn't be able to get in there, but obviously the smaller vehicles would. But overall, I should just point out there is a total of 21 spaces, and the requirement is 17. So there will be 21 spaces on site. So there will be a slight over provision in any event to accommodate for those areas where garages might not be able to be used.
Thank you. Councillor Court.
Hopefully I've got the right thing I do. Under conditions, page 71, you've talked about detailed scheme for discharge of surface water. Now, from what I can read here, it's very significant to this site, and yet it's being left until just before development. Would it not be better to be decided before, much earlier than development? It's item 22, page 71.
With you, thank you. Yes, I think you'll see from the consultation responses, we did consult with the lead local flood authority and the Environment Agency. Neither of which is to comment on the nature of this development given its scale. So again, these conditions are fairly usual to be attached and not necessarily having the information in advance. Obviously, condition 23 requires the details of the sustainable drainage system to be submitted before any development commences. Therefore, there'll be an opportunity there to ensure that it's an appropriate mechanism prior to any works actually happening on the site.
Many thanks.
Mike, I think you wanted to come in.
Thank you, Chair. It's just returning to the query that Councillor Frost raised regarding management companies, because I think it's an issue that's likely to come up on nitrate mitigation time and time again. And I suppose it's just to clarify that what we seek to secure in the Section 106 agreements is the mitigation strategy, the fact that it will be there in perpetuity. What we won't have any planning basis to do is to effectively decide who carries out the mitigation. So the test for us is that, as opposed to anything around the who does it, similar to the debates that I know have been in council around open space adoption. So I thought just necessary to make that clarification, Chair.
Thank you, Mike. Councillor Tomlin, second question.
Yeah, I'm fully aware. I've got my toes of it. I can count on this. Sorry, it's going back to the parking. So we've got it a condition 9, which is on page 67, and it says it's got to follow the drawing, and in the avoidance of doubt, this includes parking spaces to be provided within the garages. So could I just understand how we would enforce that people are using their garages for parking, or which sites would be, which houses would be conditioned to use their garage? I don't think the condition is worded firmly enough. So interesting to hear comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tomlin. I mean, effectively, the condition requires that prior to the actual occupation, as it says, the parking provision should be set out in accordance with the plans. There could be an additional line added to that to say that the parking spaces should thereafter be maintained for the purposes of parking, which is, I think, what is implied, if there was concern around that. So that element could be added. But that is effectively the intention of that condition, is to ensure that the parking is set out as per the drawings.
Thank you. I see no hands up, so we will move. Oh, Councillor McCormick.
Yeah, I'm just looking for a steer here. I mean, I'm questioning the point of having garages that are too small to put cars in them. How much weight should we add to this? Because there doesn't seem to be any point in building at all. 3 metres by 6 metres might get a 60s car in there, but if it's not 3.3 metres wide, then you're going to be able to drive a 21st century car in there and not be able to open the doors. There doesn't seem to be much point in giving permission to build buildings that are not fit for purpose.
Yeah, my understanding is that there's a total of 21 spaces, including the garages, but there will be 17 external outside spaces, if you like, which would meet and accord with the requirement of 17 as per the SPD. So they would be meeting the level required within our parking standards.
Councillor McCormick.
I understand it meets the number of spaces, but if the garage is not big enough and they're not fit for purpose, to me that doesn't count as a space. It counts as something that you can put your fly mower in, or a load of gardening stuff, but not a car. And we keep observing this on our existing 70 stock garages that we've got many thousands of across Basingstoke, and here we are with a plan to put something in that we know doesn't work, and yet we're expected to approve it. I just don't get it.
Well, they've met the parking provision in accordance with our standards, so it would be very difficult to refuse it on lack of parking when it meets the parking standards. As we all know, people use their garages for many things. So, the scheme's been developed with the provision of garages, but also it still meets our parking requirements. So it would be very difficult to. I would suggest it would be difficult to find a defensible refusal reason when the parking provision has been met in accordance with our standards.
Councillor Ganesh.
The question for Mike. Thanks for clarifying the nitrate mitigation plan. Is that something will be passed on to the residents, or will that be something as part of the condition to the builders or the developer? Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Ganesh. No, I think the point I was raising was that effectively the Section 106 works in a way of securing the mitigation plan and how it will be managed. What it won't govern is by who, effectively. So whether there's a decision made around that by the applicant, that is effectively in their control. So there's nothing within this application suggesting that it is going to go to a management company and passed on to residents. The point I was just making is that it could do. And I think that's something that is effectively outside the planning remit that we have in deciding applications. Could I just return to the parking point? Because I understand the point Councillor McCormack's raising, why have an application where there's garages proposed below the standard required by the SPD, but I think the issue here is that the parking provision overall is met in any case, and then you happen to have garage spaces which in addition are undersized. So it's unusual, but it's not something that in itself would warrant a refusal of the application on parking grounds, because effectively, as Lisa says, the SPD is met in terms of the quantity standards.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey.
Just picking up where Councillor McCormick left off, the train of question I think leads me to ask, so if the garages were not there, would that materially affect your opinion of the application? And in the sense of it not meeting RSPD, or not being, as it were, where we would like the garages were they to be provided in another development where they were relevant, would it be worth and reasonable to attach an informative to the applicant that we acknowledge as a committee that they are not compliant, and we point that out to the applicant in whatever decision we might come to? That's my first question.
Yes, and as we've said, the parking provision is met, so whether those garages were there or not wouldn't affect the recommendation, because the rest of the parking is in accordance. And obviously, if the committee felt they wanted to draw the applicant's attention to that fact, that would be something that could be added as an informative.
And my second question is picking up the point about nitrate neutrality. Would it be reasonable in the conversation that we've just been having to have an informative on the application that said we are, whatever judgment we might come to, and we're the committee to agree to the recommendation that officers have asked, then would it be reasonable to say we are passing this, for example, on the grounds that we do not know whether you will pass it on to the management company or pass it on to residents, but we are passing this on the basis that we do not believe that would be appropriate, as an informative in the discussion and the debate we've had only. There's no power, there's no compelling anybody in that regard because we haven't got the power, but we can give an opinion to the applicant, surely, that we would not want to see that as a committee in whatever decision we might come to.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. I think the only thing that you could do effectively would be, as you say, it's not a planning matter and therefore it wouldn't have any basis in terms of a condition, but I think the only thing you could do is we could have an informative which effectively says we draw to the applicant's attention that in passing the application to the Development Control Committee, but nevertheless would prefer the nitrate mitigation isn't undertaken by a management company where future residents burden the cost, something along those lines as an informative note, but effectively that's as far as it could go.
Okay, thank you, everybody. I see no hands up, so we will move on to debate. Does anybody like to start debate? No debate? The only thing I can say, as I understand it, I think it's been made quite clear that the parking would meet the standard even if the garages weren't there. So I see no reason to refuse the application or comment on that. And if there's no debate from anybody, I will move the application, the officer's recommendation from the chair. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Goderson, thank you. And if we can have a show of hands, those in favour. Oh, Councillor Frost, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm minded to agree to approve this, but I do want the two informatives being inserted, and as long as you are happy to pass that as part of your motion from the chair, I'm minded to support.
Thank you. So it has been moved and seconded with the informatives that have been suggested by Councillor Harvey. Those in favour? And I make that everyone. Yeah. Thank you. And I didn't see anyone against, but I will ask the question. Anybody against? No. Thank that motion is passed. So, Lisa.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So the recommendation, the application is approved subject to the completion of the legal agreement in terms of the nitrate woodland mitigation plan, all the conditions listed in the main report, and the two informatives that we've just spoken about regarding garage sizes and nitrate neutrality management.
Thank you. Item 2, which is land at Pamber Farm, Bramley. We have two public speakers, so if Fiona Burgess could go to microphone 1, and Chris Hyde to microphone 2, please. Right, so we have Fiona. Presumably you are Fiona Burgess. Wonderful. If you could just have a seat and wait there whilst the officer introduces the item. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is a full application for the infilling of part of an existing pond at Land at Pamber Farm, Bramley Road, Little London. It's part retrospective, given that some of the works have already been carried out. I draw members' attention to the update paper, where you will note that the applicant has clarified that planting has been undertaken along the footpath to the immediate west of the pond. This has been in relation to a previous application granted under the reference 19-02977 FUL. Notwithstanding that, further soft landscaping works were also proposed to be secured under that previous application. And again, those conditions are recommended alongside this application. For clarity, we have received an amended block plan which mirrors that of the previously approved plan but includes the area that is yet to be infilled. Therefore, the condition 1, which lists plans, has been updated to reflect that. The officer's recommendation is for approval.
Thank you, Lisa. Fiona, you have 4 minutes. I will give you a warning when you have 1 minute left. The microphone button is in front of you and it will show a red light when it's live for you.
Can you hear me? Excellent. Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Chairman and ladies and gentlemen. The application was submitted in October 2019 to regularise the work done, which was an area of infill in a pond. We had also removed rubbish from the pond, which had become a rather dirty, polluted farm pit over many preceding years. We removed lumps of concrete, old plastic containers, diesel, plastic sacks and general debris. We also unblocked a drain that was causing issues in the heavy rain. We stopped work immediately that we were instructed to, and we have undertaken no further works whatsoever to the pond in the year and 8 months since that time. I'd just like to point out that that photograph is actually very out of date. All of that has gone. Those porta cabins are not on the site anymore. We've undertaken ecology surveys as requested by the Council and also for our own interest in biodiversity recommendations. We've prepared a framework landscape enhancement plan which is included within your officer's report and on which the technical consultees have ultimately raised no objections. We have also undertaken improvements including the planting of over 700 British native hedging plants ourselves by hand, a dozen young trees and numerous bulbs and plants. We ourselves have extensive countryside knowledge and have further consulted experts to help us improve the habitat for flora and fauna on our small acreage. We've erected bird and bat boxes, identified appropriate tree species for planting in the next season, and studied rewilding approaches and wildflowers suitable for parts of our land. We wish to continue the creation of an attractive haven for wildlife, and the pond is central to the environment. And it really doesn't look like that now. That's very horrible, but it looks much nicer now. Having had time to consider the overall appearance and habitat of the pond through several seasons, we concluded that rather than retain the changes made, and contrary to the original request for further infill, we in fact would now like to remove some of the infill and encourage improved biodiversity, as well as ensuring the existing features are appropriately protected. For example, 5 oak trees on the pond boundary have 160 degrees of their lower trunk and root system exposed due to erosion of the pond over many years, putting them at risk of weakening and disease. You can see one of them in that picture, in fact. So part of the plan is to shore up the bank and cover up the roots, as well as provide access for smaller mammals and reptiles via a shallow batter. This is covered to some extent in the submitted plan. Your officer has set out how this and wider landscape enhancements can be appropriately dealt with and managed by way of planning condition going forwards. Thank you for consideration of our case, and I trust that you will support the recommendation of the case officer to approve the application.
Thank you. Questions to the Speaker? No? Thank you. If you could return to your seats, that'd be... Thank you. In that case, no questions to the Speaker. Questions to officers, and I will be strict on the two. Thank you. Well, that's easy if there's none, isn't it? Oh, Councillor McCormick.
Thank you, Chair. Just wondering if the case officer could elaborate on the state of the pond. In particular, we've heard about some of the detritus that was in the pond, but there's also things in the papers about wildlife. So what wildlife was used in the pond and what other things were in the pond?
I can't comment on what was or wasn't in the pond. I mean, obviously, there has been a survey carried out in terms of great crested newts. They were not found within the pond, but page 91 does tell us that palmate newts and common frogs were recorded. Obviously, that biodiversity officer is satisfied with the information that was given there. And there is a condition in terms of mitigation and enhancement, and that's condition 2. Just in terms... You will also note on page 86 that the environmental health team were consulted and they've not raised any objection. And that's all as far as I can advise.
Thank you. No more questions. Councillor Court.
We've heard from the applicant that they want to take out some of the infill. So does the plan which we are now looking at reflect the final perhaps solution they're looking for?
So as far as I'm aware, the plans that we have before us show that part infilling, and that's what we're being asked to consider.
Thank you.
Thank you. I see no more hands up, so we will move to debate. And I still see no hands up. Oh, Councillor Tomlin.
Chair, I was just going to propose it for acceptance, for approval. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. And I'd just like to second the motion that Councillor Tomlin has proposed.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded for approval. Those in favour? And I have everyone except one. Yeah. And those against? And I take it we have one abstention there. Councillor Hussey abstained.
Sam, I'm not happy at the lack of information. I've got no grounds to vote against.
Thank you, Councillor Hussey. That motion is passed. Officers?
Thanks. Planning permission is granted subject to the conditions set out in the main agenda with the amendment to condition 1 with reference to the plans that's set out in the update.
Thank you. Item 3. If we could just give Bernie a couple of minutes to finish cleaning microphones. Bernie's finished. Thank you. Could we have Councillor Kate Tuck to microphone 3? Nick Cobbold to microphone 4 and Councillor Godison to microphone 1.
Shame, you only do one at a time. You don't need to bring all four at once.
Okay. Right. Okay. Microphone 3, please.
No, in the front.
Okay, we'll do it. Okay, thank you. Officer to introduce.
Thank you, Chairman. Item 3, as illustrated on the screens above you, is for land at Wildwood Farm, Newnham Lane, Old Basing. Full planning permission is sought for the erection of 1 4-bedroom dwelling and 1 5-bed dwelling, with access taken from a road to the east of the site. There is a single update to bring to members' attention, where a representation has been submitted to the tree officer requesting the consideration of a tree preservation order for 2 oak trees, one being on-site, which would be subject to tree protection fencing as secured by a planning condition, and one is actually off-site. The application is recommended for approval, subject to conditions and informatives as set out in your agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Councillor Tuck, you have 4 minutes. I will warn you when you are down to have 1 minute left, and the microphone button is in front of you and it will illuminate red. And you can take your mask off while seated, yes. That's better, isn't it?
Good evening. Old Basing and Lichpit Parish Council object to this application. The NPPF criteria for sustainable development has overarching objectives of net gains across A, an economic objective, B, a social objective, and C, an environmental objective. In turn, then, the economic gain is entirely that of the landowner and the construction company. It does not help build a strong, responsive and competitive economy, nor does it support innovation and improved productivity, nor does it help by identifying and coordinating the provision of infrastructure. In fact, in terms of sustainable transport, there is no sustainable transport available here. Unless the properties were sold to cycling enthusiasts, almost all journeys would need to be by car, as the planning inspector commented in previous appeals. It therefore fails on the economic gain count. A social objective, to ensure homes can be provided with accessible services and open spaces that reflect current and future needs and support communities' health, social, cultural well-being. So 2 dwellings are a very small contribution to the housing stock, and they come with the negatives of inadequate sewerage infrastructure, detrimental impact on health and well-being of the near neighbours and the village for whom the open agricultural space is a key visual amenity. It fails on this count. An environmental objective, to contribute to protecting and enhancing our natural, built and historic environment, helping improve biodiversity and mitigating and adapting to climate change. Clearly, building on a field is detrimental to any environmental objective. Given the climate emergency this borough has declared, it seems contradictory to be building on greenfield sites impacting green infrastructure. We are concerned about runoff from this area causing more flooding in the valley below, both from the very large houses and the large areas of hard landscaping, all of which need to be permeable. The planting plan proposed at the boundary of Newnham Lane is welcome, but it is a petticoat of the most modest kind. When the application comes in for the home office, granny flat, gym space, what protections will be afforded to this planting? Answer, none. This application does not help us mitigate or adapt to climate change. It fails on the environmental objective. Moving to the local and neighbourhood plans, which still hold some weight, it contradicts our neighbourhood plan. The site is located well outside the SPB in a rural setting. Historically, a number of applications have been refused along Newnham Lane, and allowing this to proceed sets a dangerous precedent. It looks like an attempt to provide an access point to promoted site OLD 005. The landscape character is open and is a gently rolling hillside looking down into the river valley, and we are keen to preserve this. Policy EM1 landscape says development must not be detrimental to the character or visual amenity of the landscape likely to be affected, having particular regards to scenic quality and that the character of the borough's rivers, including the Loddon, should be safeguarded. Development proposals must also respect the sense of place, sense of tranquility or remoteness, and the quiet enjoyment of the landscape. This application erodes the landscape character, the dripping tap, and is merely a prequel to pushing further development of 9 dwellings. What will this committee do to reassure us this cannot happen? To say applications are assessed on their own merit is disingenuous. Every borough or neighbourhood plan ever made discusses the character of a setting as the combined and collective nature of its buildings and landscape. Biodiversity. If, despite the objections, you are minded to approve this application, the biodiversity enhancement programme needs to be substantially improved. If this is one of the justifications for approving this site, it is a lamentably low bar, and given the rural setting, and that this is the only positive element, it would be consistent to ensure a more ambitious and significant habitat improvement and protection for such enhancements in perpetuity. This must be attached as a stronger planning condition. Scale, I'd also consider they are great barns rather than a rural vernacular barn style. The height of the buildings, excluding the chimney stacks, is just below the ridgeline of Hipacre House, which given the landfall makes these 2 very large building masses with large-scale garages. Policy EM10 and EM1, they must be more sympathetic to the area. They need to be reduced in size. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions to Councillor Tuck, and I have Councillor McCormack and Councillor Ganesh.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Tuck, was there anything you didn't get the chance to say in your 4 minutes?
Can't do that, basically. It's questions on fact and clarity. You cannot ask the speaker to effectively extend their speaking time.
I'll rephrase that then. You've mentioned biodiversity and flood runoff. What's your concern with these 3 houses being built? Is it that it's going to exacerbate flooding problems, or is it just the overall environmental impact of building them in that location?
It would be both. Obviously, you're going from an agricultural field, which has visual amenity and biodiversity impact, and then you're going to put 2 very large buildings on there. They will inevitably, through their sheer mass, along with the hard landscaping, increase runoff. It's against the local plan, the neighbourhood plan, everything, and we all know we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for certain reasons.
Thank you. Councillor Ganesh.
Thank you, Chair. My question was around mentioning EM4. Just wanted to be a bit more specific around the biodiversity and nature conservation, which Councillor McCormick had already asked. And thanks for the clarification on that. Thank you.
Concrete. That's better. Councillor, I can't focus on it. Howard Sorrell. Yeah, thank you.
I'm not entirely sure that I've understood everything you said, but basically it seems like most of the objections that you have elsewhere in the document, other people have said that they're not valid concerns. So you're saying these are our concerns. Other people, as far as I can tell, are saying these aren't valid concerns. Who do I believe? And why should I believe you, more importantly? No, not to be too blunt, but I'm just, yeah, slightly confused.
Interpretation is everything. I mean, planning is all about, hopefully, planning in a broader sense, not just building. And I think what we're seeing here is extension of the village setting into an agricultural and very important landscape character area of precious and sensitive habitats such as the river valley. And what we're doing is we're encroaching on that. And I noticed that the officer used the words that this would bookend the development, which I thought, you know, if I could feel confident that was the case, I wouldn't be nearly as anxious as I am. But actually, we've seen how Park Pale failed to bookend the development to the right of Piatt's Hill. So I understand her wishes and intent, but, you know, the fact is you consider each planning application on its one and only individual merit, but in fact it is never its own individual thing. It's the sum of the landscape it sits in, and that's why you have to consider this here and now and not later on. It's encroachment, it's extending everything in a way that we are particularly fond of the open landscape of the River Valley, which the planning inspector refers to in his assessment of that, and was precisely why it was not put forward in the local plan last time round. And I'd love your biodiversity office to have a day out to look at improving the biodiversity offering there, if you're minded to approve this application. Thank you.
Councillor Frost. Thank you. Councillor Howard-Sorrell, you've indicated that you don't understand and you don't know who to believe. I've been advised by legal that it would be best if you abstained when it comes to the vote.
I may have misspoken. I understand what I'm reading in the document. I was just trying to get a sense of why the disagreements specifically were being brought up around biodiversity protection, because from what I've read here, biodiversity shouldn't be impacted. From what I heard, biodiversity will be impacted. So that I was just trying to get that clarification, which I haven't necessarily had, but I'm minded to believe what I've read in the documents. So.
Thank you. Anne, would you like to come in on that?
No, if
Okay, thank you. I see no more hands for questions, so if we could move to debate. Sorry. Right. I'm new to this, so sorry. Next speaker, Mr. Cobbold.
Oh, there we are. Thank you, Chair. Good to be back in person, I must say. I think just to address Councillor Howard-Sorrell's concerns, to be pretty blunt on the matter, it sounds like the Parish Council just don't want new houses and are going to throw anything to try and stop them. We've already heard on item 1 that small developments outside defined settlements remain part of the Council's accepted approach to sustainable development, and that's due to the location and, of course, your absence of a 5-year land supply. Whilst the argument being put forward by the applicants and planning consultants such as me appears repetitive, you have them every month, I know that, it doesn't mean that the approach should change. The absence of a 5-year land supply and in the absence of sufficient site allocations, or sites within settlement boundaries for that matter, such proposals, they remain the best source of an alternative new housing. In terms of this specific proposal, you've got the officer's report that gives you a clear view as to why it's acceptable and why all the site-specific issues have been found in favour of the proposal and of giving planning permission. The site is right at the edge of the built-up area, the current built-up area. It's a linear arm of Old Basing heading towards Newnham and with an established employment use on the former farm to the rear. Of course, yes, it's outside the settlement boundary, but the application site relates well to the settlement and the surrounding built form, and it's been established that sites like this, as I've just said, can accommodate more houses in a sustainable manner. I actually like the farmstead layout. I think it's a good design. It's consistent with the semi-rural feel of the area, and it also reflects the prevailing character of family houses in comfortable plots with private parking. Just to deal with the objections and the third-party comments, there's been talk of a local green space between Newnham Lane and Pyatt's Hill. We've also heard of the River Valley from the parish councillor. There's no policy designation here. There's nothing that you have to take into account other than the fact it is countryside outside of the settlement boundaries. So any potential designation is not directly relevant to the site. No local green space is being designated through either the local plan or indeed the neighbourhood plan. The site has to be of particular importance to qualify for a local green space designation, which I dare say this one isn't. The site's not in a flood zone. There's no evidence that the site will flood. Surface water will be fully managed, as you know, through building regulations. And biodiversity concerns have all been assessed by the biodiversity officer. The other consistent objection is the highway impact. Sustainable transport is only one arm of sustainable development. It's not the be-all or end-all like it used to be in the old days before the NPPF. The impact of 2 dwellings on the highway, that's about 1 movement every hour or so, so it's not grounds for refusing planning permission. And I just want to clarify, it's 2 houses. There's no other application in the pipeline. There's obviously an application further up Wildmoor Lane at the development, the commercial site. But that's a completely different argument to this. It's a completely different proposal. There's no other proposal. This is the one in front of you, 2 houses on a small site. There's a massive need for houses. It's only 2 dwellings, but it will help the housing need of the area. There's no harm identified by the officers or by the statutory consultees for that matter, and therefore the benefits of the new houses must outweigh the harm. We've heard from the parish council that they want this to be refused, but why should every other parish, such as the one we heard on item 1, pull its weight in approving new houses and not Old Basing? I don't think that's right. Thanks very much.
We have 550 houses allocated.
Sorry, but you cannot interrupt. You've had your speaking time. Please do not interrupt again. Thank you, Mr. Cobbold. Questions for Mr. Cobbold? Councillor Tomlin.
Oh, sorry. Good evening, Mr. Cobbold. The borough has declared a climate emergency. Can you tell me what are your plans with this development to help the borough achieve a reduction in its carbon footprint? Thank you.
Sorry, can you clarify in what policy context you're asking me this so I can give you a decent answer, hopefully?
Well, as you rightly know, there are no policies, so the question is in terms of how you're going to make the place energy efficient and help to actually generate this. Are you doing anything at all? There's nothing in here, and we do not require it under any condition, but we do put informatives. But I just wanted to know whether you were preparing to do anything.
There wouldn't be any requirement in the planning application because this quite deliberately has been taken out of the planning remit and into the building control remit. That's why Brianne was taken out. It's why Code for Sustainable Homes was taken out. It was put into the building regulations. The proposal will be fully compliant with the building regulations. And from a purely planning perspective, that is the commitment, and that's why you don't have a policy on that, because the building regulations are a separate arm. So I can't give you any more than the guarantee that it will obviously satisfy building regulations.
Councillor McCormack, did you have your hand up?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I did. And just picking up on Councillor Tomlin's point. So we've got some drawings before us of 2 very large houses that will have a lot of volume of air to heat, but there doesn't seem to be any kind of eye-catching climate emergency initiatives. There doesn't seem to be any solar panels or anything like that. Is that a deliberate choice on your part because you don't have to do it? Because I would have thought that would add to the design, if nothing else. I mean, setting aside things that we can't consider, like making a house more, attractive to someone to buy or whatever. I'm just at a loss to understand why these things aren't in there, because I'd have thought it'd be a bit of a no-brainer, even if there isn't a policy directing you to do so. Is there anything, is there any kind of grey water initiatives or anything like that that makes this a modern 21st century design?
I think to answer your question, yes, there can be grey water initiatives. Yes, there can be solar panels. My role as a planner is to advise on what policy requirements need to be satisfied for a planning application. So that is my focus when advising applicants, when advising my clients. By all means, if you want to have some guarantees, you can put a planning condition on to say we want details of them. I can't commit to any individual one, and to be honest, I would be reluctant to put things like solar panels on a planning application, because you put solar panels on a planning application and suddenly someone says, we don't like solar panels, there's going to be reflective glare, there's going to be something else, and suddenly you've created a problem when you didn't need to because you haven't got a policy that actually you need to address through it. So I think we've got to keep focused on the planning elements of this proposal, the planning policies, and that's obviously the way I advise, and I think that's the way you should determine it.
Councillor Ganesh.
Thank you, Chair. Picking up on Councillor Tomlinson and McCormick's question and your answer to the Council's local plan says to delivering high quality development. So are there anything specific that you've tried to attach to it as part of the planning?
Mr. Gill, thank you.
So I think that's the same question I've answered. No, on the planning application, we haven't committed to anything. I'm sitting here saying, feel free to put a condition on which will commit us to it. And obviously there are requirements through other legislation as well. But no, for the sake of this planning application, we have not put forward. And if you look through other planning applications, it's not. I'm not going against the grain here. Very seldom do you get all the renewable energy factors shown on the planning application itself. That is for further down the line.
Thank you. Councillor Court.
Thank you, Chair. I've read with interest some of the concerns that are with flooding on the site, and I've read the officer's response on that, particularly to do with the flood risk assessments. What I have noticed is something called a sustainable urban drainage system. Now, I'm not sure what that is, and I would welcome some explanation, and that we have at least some assurance that will handle the water that's clearly going to come from these quite substantial buildings. Thank you.
I'm not sure that's a question for me, but I mean, I can give you a very general answer. It is a sustainable drainage system by name and by nature. A sustainable drainage system can take a number of different forms, but ultimately it is the best solution for that particular site, for the topography, for the soils, and all sorts of things are factored into the calculations. But again, that's in the design stage and the specific design stage rather than just the planning design stage to factor that into the application.
That up again. Are we just simply talking of something like a very large hole in the ground, etc., that sort of thing?
Thank you, Chair. Would it be possible for Councillor Court to move towards his microphone? I'm finding it very, very difficult to hear you, sir. Thank you.
Certainly. I also think the questions you're asking, Councillor Court, may actually be better addressed to the officers, because they appear to be technical questions on SUDS, which I personally think you're asking the wrong person the question. But anyway, we will continue.
Thank you. I'll accept the advice. I will leave that question as it is. Many thanks.
Thank you. Any more questions for Mr. Cobbold? No, thank you, Mr. Cobbold. And next speaker is Councillor Godison. You have 4 minutes, Ben.
Thank you. If anybody can't hear me, please say so and I'll speak up. I'm obliged to the chairman for letting me address the committee as a ward member. Reason number 3 for approval states the development would not cause an adverse impact on highway safety. I would wish to challenge that statement. Newnham Lane is a narrow, very narrow and windy lane that is one of the main entry points into our village. It is also a morning rat run, taking traffic that wishes to avoid Black Dam from the M3 at Hook into the Danes Hill and other trading estates. It can be a very dangerous road, and as such, this development does not comply with CN9D, which states must not result in inappropriate traffic generation or compromise highway safety. I would also mention that the development is not within our settlement boundary policy. Not that that seems to count for very much these days. More importantly, it does not comply with our neighbourhood plan. The plan has been accepted and adopted by the borough, and only a few days ago we were informed at our planning workshop that such a plan has equal status with our LDF and MPPF and must be given maximum weight. The Basing Plan identifies various areas where development is expected and acceptable. Newham Lane is emphatically not one of those areas. I would also mention that Newham Lane is not a recognised cycle route and there are no pedestrian ways. Only this morning I spoke to one of the residents living some doors away and was informed that the main sewer runs along the middle of the lane and ends some 200 yards from this development site. When the sewer was put in, the lane was closed for 6 weeks to all traffic. I would ask that the committee refuse approval on the basis that it does not comply with CN9 and is against our neighbourhood plan and is outside our SPB. In the event of the application being approved, I would ask that a condition be imposed that the development, in view of its proximity to the River Loddon, must be connected to the main sewer system. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Councillor Goderson. Questions for the councillor? Councillor Howard-Sorrell.
Your objection seems to be largely based on Newham, I think there's a mistype, being impacted. The driveway isn't on that road. It comes off on a private road. How is a few extra cars twice a day coming in and out off of a private road onto Newham Road?
Sorry, can you speak up a bit?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. Your objection seems to be largely based on Newham Road being impacted. The driveways for the proposed development doesn't exit onto Newham Road, so I'm really not understanding how you think it's going to impact it at all.
Any cars coming out of that Any cars coming out of that driveway have nowhere to go except onto Newham Lane, as the rest of it is a cul-de-sac. If you come out of the driveway, you have to turn left and go down onto Newham Lane. If you turn right, you end up at the end of the, with nowhere to go. Sorry.
I see no more hands for questions, so Councillor McCormack.
I'm just wondering how much effect are these two houses going to have on the housing supply? Because it was mooted that it would benefit the housing supply, but it seems a very small incremental benefit at best.
Sorry, the effect on the housing supply, well, obviously two houses is a very small effect on the housing supply. I'm just suggesting that even these two houses puts unnecessary stress on Newham Lane, which is already a very dangerous and a very tricky access point from higher up in the Hook area into the village. It's a tiny, well, as you may or may not know, it's a very narrow, very windy lane. It was built for the horse and cart, not for the motor car.
Should have gone to officers. So, yeah, thank you. I see no more hands for Councillor Goderson, so we will move on to, thank you to all the speakers, we move on to questions to officers. Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to pick up the last question, please, on how officers feel or think that there would be an impact on traffic on Newham Lane. Bearing in mind, Hampshire County Council Highways have said their initial comments on page 104. Standing advice, however, recommend visibility displays as shown. If you could please give some clarity on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Again, I think I would refer you back to the officer's report where, as you've just cited, the Hampshire County Council, as the local highway authority, have considered this application and have raised no objection. So therefore, I would be minded to follow their comments and their advice in that this would not have an overriding significant impact upon the traffic flows on Newnham Lane in order to be able to justify any reason for refusal on highways.
Councillor McCormack.
Yeah, well, it's just picking up. Councillors Tomlin and myself asked some questions on the climate emergency, and that seems to be a standard thing now as an informative number 3 in our applications. But what options are there at our disposal to strengthen that to a condition? Because I can see that applications coming forward are not going to be meeting our expectations of the climate emergency.
Thank you, Councillor McCormack. I think you're right. It probably will come up more than once, so I think I'll try and make this as clear as possible. The basic position that you have is that you do not have any planning policies against which you determine applications which require certain things other than the policy requiring water efficiency. So that is a condition. Anything beyond that cannot be a planning condition. It wouldn't meet the test of reasonableness. So the only thing that you could do as a committee would be to put an informative to say that you would encourage, which is the informative which is there. And the reason that's put on in its widest possible sense is basically drawing to the attention a council position about climate change as opposed to a local planning authority position or any adopted policy. So the informative there is the maximum, if you like, that the committee could impose.
Thank you, Mike. Councillor Gaskell.
Thank you, Chair. My first question sort of from the Parish Council comments that historically a number of applications for development along Newnham Lane have been refused. Has there been any precedent set on those applications, and have we addressed that precedent against this application?
Firstly, I would consider that we do have to look at this application on its own merits against our current planning policy context, which of course is bearing weight to the NPPF as well as our local policies. I did do an initial search along Newnham Lane earlier today about planning history, and there were a couple of refusals for dwellings along Newnham Lane that I managed to pick up, but they are very, very dated. One was from 2005, one was from 1983, so they are predating our current NPPF and our current sort of stance on how we consider dwellings in the countryside, so I wouldn't say they were setting a precedent.
But there was nothing substantial in those applications which reflects on this application?
Not that I can see, no, and there's no planning history for this particular site other than some stables, but that's nothing, it's not relevant to this application.
Thank you.
The other question was, again, from the Parish Council notes, that it contradicts the neighbourhood plan. I just wanted to ask officers how you've got around that if there's a neighbourhood plan and, you know, it's sort of set, how do we sort of override that?
So the neighbourhood plan does form part of the development plan against which we are determining planning applications. However, because we don't have the 5-year housing land supply, our policies within the development plan, which includes the neighbourhood plan when the neighbourhood plan is of a certain age, are afforded less weight. So therefore, our starting point is, as set out within the report, where we are referring back to the NPPF and the location of the site and its impacts as to whether or not they would result in any overriding demonstrable harm, which would override the presumption in favour of development for housing in this location, where it's not deemed to be in an isolated location. And that's all set out in the report before you.
Thank you.
Councillor Ganesh.
Thank you, Chair. We've heard two versions from our speakers today about drainage, and the main sewer ends a few hundred yards from the development, and the sustainable drainage system. So what sort of considerations or provisions in the applications? Thank you.
Okay, I would first draw members' attention to the report, where on page, I can find it,
page 116, that the site is not located within an area that is at risk of flooding as such. So that is particularly referring to fluvial flooding. Of course, you have the issue of surface water flooding, but this site is not within a critical drainage area, as reported. The applicant is obviously looking to implement a sustainable urban drainage system, and that tends to try and maximise the level of infiltration to the ground, in my understanding, not being an engineer. When you look at the site plan, you can see that both properties have large plots, so there's ample opportunity to implement a sustainable urban drainage system, which could be controlled through building regs. Of course, we could always implement an informative to beef that up, but again, it wouldn't be recommended to have that as any kind of condition.
I think, Councillor Gaskell, you've had two questions, possibly even stretching to three, so I suggest you bring it up and in debate. Again, I see no hands up, so we will move to debate, and I suppose we will be starting with Councillor Gaskell.
Yeah, my issue is, I mean, I live in Newnham, so I don't know whether I should declare that, but I use that road and I have experienced it flooding. So to turn around and say it doesn't flood is not within my experience. That road is subjective to quite a considerable flooding, and you can see the state of the road. There's quite a lot of potholes there, and you know, I have a 4x4, but sometimes it's risky even going through there because it's so deep. So I just wanted to make that point.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey.
Here we go. We're on. We'll get there eventually. We have the technology. Bearing in mind that we do have the NPPF and of course the 5-year housing land supply argument, which I respect, we also have our local plan policies that we should judge against. And I note policy SS6, which is in this committee setting as controversial an occasion as it gets. Sorry, forgive me. I note we have the NPPF. I note that we have the 5-year housing land supply issue that's constantly raised. We also have our local plan policies, which we do judge applications against, and we should consider tonight in the weighting of whatever decision we come to. In that context, we have policy SS6, and that is perhaps, on occasion, perhaps the most controversial policy in this committee setting, because there are so many parts to it, and we have a debate usually over which part fits which part of an application. In this context, from where I read the officer's report, this application doesn't hit a single item on policy SS6. The officers consistently refer in the report to where it does not meet a single aspect of policy SS6. So this is development in the countryside. It doesn't meet any of the tests of our policy for development in the countryside, and I would like to give that some weight in the consideration of this application because it is so divorced from where we would normally be in any consideration of this sort of application if it was before us without the get out of jail card of a 5-year housing land supply argument. And I think we've just got to balance that. So at the moment, I'm waiting in my mind just how important should policy SS6 be in this debate. And considering there isn't a single line in SS6 that's met, I'm giving it quite some weight, actually. I think it should be tested.
Thank you, Jeff. So just to, I suppose, to assist the committee on that point, the key position is that weight can be given to the local plan policies, but those that are out of date because of the 5-year supply position have a reduced amount of weight. So it's not that you set them aside in their entirety, but then you need to consider them in the round in accordance with effectively the position and the tests out in the National Planning Policy Framework in that scenario. And that policy conflict, if you like, is documented in the report, and the balanced position that the recommendation follows is that although it doesn't actually meet any of the specific requirements of policy SS6, nevertheless the thrust of some of that policy is consistent with NPPF in terms of making sure that development in the countryside is not isolated, and the report sets out the reasons why in this instance it's considered that it's not isolated in that sense. That in itself is consistent with paragraph 79 of the NPPF. So in terms of how much weight that policy can be given in that regard, that element of it is up to date. And effectively, the way that you would need to consider the application as a committee would be to consider whether there's any significant adverse impacts that would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits of the scheme. and if you like, an objection in principle to the development being in the countryside in itself doesn't hit the level of harm, if you like, that would justify refusal. So that is the basis on how the report has addressed policy SS6 and afforded the relevant weights.
Thank you, Mike. Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to point out to the committee that in policy SS6 E4, E says that small-scale residential proposals of a scale and type that meet a locally agreed need, provided that, number 4, it is well related to the existing settlement and would not result in an isolated form of development. In reality, looking at the positioning of this particular development, it's not isolated because it's on the edge of the development, so it's next to Hipacre House. So in reality, I know whilst the report says it doesn't meet SS6, I think it does meet various considerations of SS6, and that can be led, and weight can be led against that. Okay, so it's just where I am. Maybe Mike, you can add some clarity to that, or maybe I've clarified it enough.
Thank you, Councillor Frost. I think that's absolutely right. So effectively, that it doesn't meet the first part of policy SS6E because the local need hasn't been demonstrated. Yet it is within the scale of that element, so it's less than 4 dwellings clearly. But that element, you're absolutely right, of policy SS6E, which seeks to secure development or not permit development to be isolated, the report effectively recommends that it meets that element. And as I say, that is consistent with the thrust of the NPPF under paragraph 79 on the same point around isolation.
Thank you, Mike. Any more for debate? Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we're between a rock and a hard place, really. I think maybe your hearts might suggest that this is too much development in the countryside, but the reality in planning terms, as we've just had discussed, is that we are in a situation where we're vulnerable, if you like, to this, and there have been many applications made by this committee over the last year or two at least within this 5-year land supply issue where similar sites have been approved. So I suppose reluctantly, I think in moving things forward, I'm quite happy to propose that this is accepted, this is approved. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tomlin. Councillor Frost.
And I'm happy to second Councillor Tomlin's motion.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded for approval. Those in favour? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Right, that's 7, 4. And those against? 2 against. And abstentions? 1. You made that 7, 4, 2, did you? 7, 4, 2.
Can you put the condition in on the sewage?
Thank you. That has been approved. Officer.
Thank you, Chairman. That application has been approved subject to the conditions and informatives as set out within the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Sorry. Go ahead.
I just wanted to, that happened very quick about the conditions for the sewage, that it was going to be a packaged sewage plant or something. Is that in there? Okay. Can the office?
No. It's 116, but it doesn't say.
Right. Sorry.
Just to clarify for the record, no, that wasn't a specific condition secured in the motion, but in any case, the drainage of the site would be secured through building regulations in that sense, so there wouldn't have been a requirement for a condition beyond that. But effectively, it wasn't part of the motion that was voted on, Councillor.
Councillor Gaskell.
Does building regulations
Should cover surface water drainage, not just on this site, but the runoff onto the other sites and further down the lane where it's an issue.
Do you want me to go? I think we're moving into an area of policy rather than an area of what is specific to this planning application. So I think that's something you need to take up with the officers out of this meeting. So thank you, everybody. Councillor Godison, would you like to rejoin the committee? Thank you. Item 4 on the agenda, we have no public speakers, so in that case, officer to introduce.
Thank you, Chairman. This application, item 4 on your agenda, is a house order application for the property of 28 Woodruff Drive in Basingstoke, as illustrated through the drawings on the screens above. The application comprises the conversion of the garage and the additions of extensions to the front, side and rear of the property, together with the raising of the ridge height by 1.1 metres to provide accommodation at the first floor level. Let's say there's no update for this item, which is recommended for approval subject to the conditions and informatives as set out in the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. As said, we have no public speakers, so straight into questions to officers. Councillor McCormack.
So I just want to have a confirmation of something that's in my mind, but not quite 100% there, about policies with 1.5-storey houses in the Berg estate. Now, this application is recommended for approval, but I have concerns that the Berg estate is fairly unique in Basingstoke, is that it's a state of bungalows. And there are conditions, as I understand it, and I'd welcome any officer clarification of that as to sort of maximum ridge height, etc., that might be in place. That this is a 1.5-storey property, and I just have concerns that this might be the thin end of the wedge. We've seen in other parts of town that bungalows end up being 2-storey properties. I don't think we've got much of a leg to stand on because the photos demonstrate and the drawings that the house next door's already had a loft con. So it does look like this is part of a trend. But what I presume this is within the acceptable limits. But at what point would an extension with another storey become unacceptable in this context?
Okay. I mean, to start with, I have noted that the representations to the application refer to a covenant rather than a condition. So a covenant wouldn't be a material planning consideration that we could afford any weight to. In terms of limits to adding extra floors within properties, again, on the state as a whole, that's not something before us. We are considering this particular application, and as members will have noted from the photos, there are numerous examples within the area where first floor accommodation has been created within the loft space. And this is another application considering the conversion and the extension to the loft space to provide first floor accommodation. So we've got to consider this one on its own merits.
Thank you, Catherine. Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. Briefly, can you just indicate how much of this might be permitted development on this particular application? Thank you.
Right. Okay, so the conversion of the garage could be permitted development. The raising of the ridge height is not permitted. that right? Yeah. So that would need permission in its own extent. But as also set out within your report, they could insert dormer windows to certain elevations within the existing property at the existing ridge height under permitted development. But that would be to the sides and rear, not the front. But again, because they are raising the ridge height, that is what is triggering the need for the planning permission. The property may also be able to undertake single-storey extensions of various depths, either under permitted development rights or subject to a prior approval notification to the council. So there is quite a lot you can actually do under permitted development, but this one particularly gets caught because they're raising the ridge height.
I don't see any more hands up, but I'm going to ask a question myself. Can you flick back through the visualizer? There's one with a double sort of dormer. If you could just flick through the pictures. That one. Can you tell me how far away that one is? Because obviously the roof height has been raised on that, and in, shall we say, a less conventional way. How far away is that from the one that we're talking about?
I would hazard a guess it's not too far because we're considering number 28 and that is number 52. I have to admit, I don't know the precise location as on the location plan, but I would suggest it's probably just outside of the location plan, but not too far away.
I know that estate well, it's about 250 metres away.
Thank you, Councillor McCormack. Okay, thank you, Catherine. So it's well within sight, which is the issue from my point of view. Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to look at parking on here. I understand that under the parking SPD, that there is provision for vehicular car parking spaces, but I've noticed that on page 138, the second paragraph up, you said that the current garage does not meet the requirement, as in it's not 7 by 3.2 metres. And I'm just wondering, you know, has that been pointed out to the householder? Okay, could it be put as an informative if they aren't going to increase the size of the garage? Okay, so that we can just point it out to the householder.
I don't know whether it has been pointed out to the applicant or not, but the fact it's in the report would probably suggest the advice is there. But they could convert the garage under permitted development rights, regardless of whether or not it could accommodate a property. And when you're looking at the extension to the side of the property, it would actually block access to the garage, which is to be converted in any event. So that we are discounting that particular parking space, or whether it is a parking space or not, in any event. And where they are providing parking to the front of the site, as you can see, parking is already being used there. The front garden is providing hard standing already. And when you consider it in the overall balance and the considerations on highway grounds, the officer report is recommending that there isn't a significant harm arising from the shortfall of one space against an overall standard required for this property.
Thank you, Catherine. Sorry, you made perfect sense when you actually explained it. I obviously, when reading the report, didn't connect the dots. Thank you.
Thank you. I see no hands up, so we will move to debate. Anybody? If there's no debate, I will. Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I looked long and hard at this, okay, because while I know a lot can be done under the permitted development rights, obviously the raising of the ridge height is the one thing that pulls it here, as has been said before. I have to say that there is so much that can be done under PD, okay, that I am minded to approve it, okay, purely on the report, and should the chair wish, I'm happy to make that a motion.
Thank you, Councillor Frost. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Court. In that case, it has been moved and seconded for approval. Those in favour? And that's a full set.
Thank you, Chairman. That application has been approved, subject to the conditions and informatives as set out within your agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. Item 5. Could Michael Pragnell please come forward and sit at position 2? Thank you. If you wait there whilst the officer introduces the item.
Thank you, Chairman. This application seeks full planning permission for the site of the White Bungalow, as well as adjacent agricultural land on Ash Lane, Silchester. As illustrated on the screens, the proposal is for the removal of the replacement of the existing bungalow and its replacement with a 5-bed dwelling, and the change of use of agricultural land to residential, along with the erection of a further 2 3-bedroom dwellings. There is an update for this item where comments were received to respond to the officer's report as set out in the update paper. These comments address matters such as the status of the land, the landscape comments, and how the proposal could overcome adverse harm to amenity. The application is recommended for refusal as set out in the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Mr. Pragnell, you have 4 minutes. I will warn you when you have 1 minute left, and if you press the button, your red light will come on. And
thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to address the committee this evening. We're residents of the Pound Conservation Area, which is a small hamlet without amenities, lying some 80 metres north of the proposed construction. With the name Pound, the area probably dates back to Saxon times. Today's varied housing dates back to the early 17th century, and I'm speaking this evening on behalf of the residents of the conservation area. White Bungalow itself, there's no evidence of planning permission to change the original curtilage of formerly the hut, nor adjacent land from agricultural to brownfield. The site should be considered agricultural. These new houses are not affordable housing, and the application is contrary to the national framework, the area being 0.7 hectares, and this is a reason for refusal. Our main objections to the application include considerations under 3 broad headings. These would significantly outweigh any benefit from 3 new houses. First, aesthetic. In addition to a new red brick house on the site of White Bungalow, 2 adjacent red brick houses of similar modern design in an isolated rural location would be out of keeping with the historic architecture of the conservation area. This consists of individually styled houses, either listed or of special interest. The new housing would be contrary to BDLP policy EM11. They would harm the landscape and minimise the strategic gap between the conservation area itself and Silchester Brook, which we may or may not be able to see on that map, and it would invite further infill, contrary to BDLC policy EM2. Safety and environmental. Additional traffic with provision of up to, we understand, 12 new car parking slots on a narrow winding lane, very narrow winding lane, with limited parking spaces and damaged verges, would increase the accident risk and prangs that are already frequent. Additional vehicles would also add to the environmental impact. An appeal decision under planning reference 19/01724 in December 2020 dismissed an application for a single dwelling on nearby Bramley Road as reliance upon private cars would conflict with the national framework. This agricultural land is also a dark zone with a mix of wildlife, including bats and owls, that would be threatened by artificial light after dark. Services. Because this is a rural conservation area, there are limited utilities. No mains water supply at the top of Ash Lane, nor gas nor piped sewage in the pound area. The nearest public transport is a mile away in Silchester Village, with limited services of 7 buses per weekday. The nearest shopping area is 3 miles away in Tadley. In summary, we object to this on the following grounds. All 3 proposed houses extend beyond the original curtilage of White Bungalow, as shown by the Land Register, lying outside any designated settlement policy boundary. Under BDLP policy SS1, this is considered countryside. The aesthetic impact of 3 similar red brick houses would be detrimental to the historic and diverse pound conservation area, contrary to BDLP M11. Important rural habitat and local wildlife would also be threatened. Vehicle movement in and out of 3 new houses at the top of Ash Lane would bring considerable danger from increased traffic in this narrow lane. I would urge the committee to refuse this application, as indeed is recommended.
Thank you. Members, questions to the Speaker? What? I have none, so thank you, Mr. Pregnell. If you could return to your seat. Could we have Caroline Downey to microphone 3, please? Okay. And Claire Macklin to microphone 4, please. 3's in the front row. In fact, they're both in the front row. Thank you. You have 4 minutes between you. How you split that up is entirely up to you, but please bear in mind you can only have 1 microphone on at a time. If it lights up green, it means the other person's microphone is still on. So it's all yours. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Claire Macklin and it is my husband and I who are the applicants. I'm here today to give you the personal reasons behind our application. My husband Stuart is the 3rd generation of farmers in Silchester. He has lived in Silchester all his life and I have lived here for over 25 years. We feel embedded in the Silchester community, our children having attended the local primary and secondary schools and having held positions on many of the village committees. We would like to remain in the village for our retirement. However, to do this, we need to make succession plans for our farm. Our son wishes to take on the farm, so with this in mind, the new development would enable us to relocate, release the farm, and make provisions for our 2 other children. We intend to build a passive house using insulated concrete fabrication, which gives an airtight construction and incorporating solar panels, battery storage, and ground source heat pump. Going carbon neutral is something we feel passionate about. We have support from many of the local residents who are grateful we have cleared the unauthorised rubbish dump, which has been an eyesore for over 20 years, to hopefully create an attractive small development which will enhance the area. I hope this explains our situation and the reasons for our application. Thank you. Press it.
Thank you, Chairman, members. Can you hear me?
Oh, press it.
Everyone hear me? Yep, sorry. Thank you very much. Following the update, there are now 2 outstanding reasons for refusal. 1 is sustainability and isolation, and 2 is landscape harm. Firstly, may I remind members that no council consultees objected to the scheme, including the landscape officer. In regards to sustainability and isolation, there are 11 dwellings within 300 metres. The site sits between 2 established residential plots, and therefore, unlike the site mentioned by the objector here tonight, are not isolated. It is evident, as you'll have seen from the video, a brownfield site, and as 1 planning unit, the entire site is therefore previously developed land. This application reaches the tests set out in SS6A. Furthermore, there are 2 recently approved dwellings further up the lane, which are further from Silchester, and yet they are viewed as sustainable in that location. Critically, members, I would like to try and explain a bit further the meaning of paragraph 11. Paragraph 11 of the NPPF states that where there is a lack of 5-year housing land supply, there is a presumption in favour of development when considering an application in terms of the tilted balance. To overturn the presumption in favour, the harm must be of such magnitude that it outweighs not only the presumption in favour, but also the many benefits gained from the scheme. Imagine, if you will, a set of weighing scales. On one side, you have the benefits, and on the other, you have the harm. In order for the council to refuse this application, the weight has to be substantially weighted on the harm side of the scale. As there is a presumption in favour, the weighting scale is already weighting on the benefits side. The benefits of this scheme are: 1, the site is previously developed land. That is a substantial benefit. 2, it's a sustainable location, a substantial benefit. 3, development would provide 2 additional market houses, is a clear substantial benefit. 4, economic benefits in providing jobs in the construction and operational phases of the development and resident spending locally, a benefit. The environmental and biodiversity elements of the scheme would be a moderate benefit. There are no consultee objections, and the local resident supports far outweigh the local objections. Cumulatively, these benefits weigh heavily in favour of the scheme. Therefore, when considering the weighing scale analogy, the weight is in favour, in favour, i.e. to approve it. The site has been known to this council and to residents as an unlawful dumping ground. The scheme tidies up the site, creates 3 vital dwelling houses much needed by this council due to their current 5-year housing land supply issue, which, as you've heard from this evening, is an issue. Are designed sympathetically with a significant nod to their rural location, are family homes for future generations. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Members, questions for the speakers? I have one, which is, could you tell me whose ownership the land was in and how it was allowed to get into such an appalling state? Because I think we've all seen the photographs on the visualiser of a lot of detritus around the site. Thank you.
It was, we have owned it for many years, over 25 years, but we had a life tenant on it. That the gentleman who lived there came to us years ago and said if we bought it from him because he was in financial difficulties, could he have life tenancy on it? And that is what happened. And so unfortunately, he started off making charcoal and stuff like that, and then as he got older he started just accepting rubbish on the site and had everyone backing their vans in for cash to dump their rubbish, and unfortunately we couldn't do anything about that because we had a contract with him for a life tenancy.
Thank you. Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. Regarding the plans that we have in front of us, the site layout, proposed site layout, can you give us an indication of the distances between the properties, please? Yeah, sorry, not that picture. That's the one. Yeah. That's it. Yeah.
The distance between so plot 1 and plot 2 and plot 3 probably have a distance of approximately 100 metres, I'd say. It's difficult to know without a scale ruler on me. 50 metres, I suppose, between the two, approximately. Sorry, 50 metres approximately between the two.
50 between each one?
Yeah, approximately. I mean, the difficulty with the plot 1 site is that the landscape drops away. So in terms of the topography, the landscape, that's why the building then kind of hugs the landscape, if you like, as it moves down the slope.
Thank you.
Mike, I think you wanted to come in.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a point of clarification, because I know Ms Stanley mentioned about the fact that there's only one of the reasons for refusal being withdrawn, but in fact all the reasons for refusal are still form part of the recommendation. I'm just clarifying that with the officers, but they are all part of the recommendation still.
Thank you. I see no hands up, so thank you very much. And we move to questions to officers. I'll start the ball rolling in that case if nobody else is desperate. Could you clarify the curtilage situation on the site, the whole site, and exactly what is what and how it divides up?
Okay, I will endeavour to try. So if I draw members' attention to the location plan before you, you will see the existing property of White Bungalow within the red edge close to the road. And then to the rear of that, to the east, you will see a small rectangle. That used to be an outbuilding. Now, on the planning history for the site, the rear boundary of the curtilage to the existing property ran alongside that. And we actually have a plan within the visualiser which shows that. So if you compare possibly the bottom left hand, right hand, depending which way you're looking at it, drawing which shows the site annotated with the dark rectangle. And then if you compare that to drawing 169, you can see that the curtilage is actually considerably smaller in terms of the authorised residential use. Now, there have been references to other land uses within the surrounding the property and extensions to curtilages, but when we're looking at the lawful planning history, there hasn't been any certificates of lawful use submitted to confirm any extensions to the residential curtilage over time, nor for any changes of use of adjacent agricultural land, which sits to the south within the red edge. I'm not sure if I've covered everything, if I've missed something. Okay.
Thank you for the clarification. Anyone else for questions to officers? In that case, debate. Councillor Gaskell.
Sorry, I'm just trying to understand what you just said then. So obviously the building on Greenfield land, would that set a precedent for other future building within the conservation area on Greenfield land, if we accepted that?
So firstly, this site's not in a conservation area, it is outside the boundary. So what we are considering is this site on agricultural land and part residential curtilage, so it's extending beyond the curtilage. And as set out in the report, we refer to the location of the site, the change of use of the land, and those sort of cumulative impacts. So it's all within the report before you.
Thank you. Debate. Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. Well, this site has become in my new ward, so I have been to go and have a look at it because it's obviously local. Now, looking at one of the visualiser plans there, you can see the aerial view, whether that's from Google or somewhere, but I would contest that this is not isolated, given the fact that that development to the south is a large industrial farm complex with business units. And then you've got a string of housing all the way up to where the top yellow circle is. The red circle being where that bungalow on this plot is. So there's precedent of development there. The land either side of the white bungalow to the top is in the ownership, I believe, of the yellow circled at the top, and looks like a wildflower meadow. Certainly not agricultural. Well, it may be designated as agricultural, but it's a wildflower meadow. And the green area below the site looks like it's been mown by the resident as a sort of informal garden, clear paddock. So there's not heavy agricultural going on there. So I would say that certainly, in my opinion, that is not isolated by the definition from our Braintree case. It's interesting, one of the other issues there that I'm reading in the report is overlooking and overbearing of the plots to each other. And I think we heard the applicant, when I asked the question, say they're about 50 metres apart. We just passed on item 3, one where the site was 14 metres apart and there was no overlooking issues there. So I would say 50 metres apart. It'd be nice if my neighbours were further away, to be honest, than 50 metres, but that isn't the case. So I'm having difficulty in actually seeing how the first reason for refusal about isolation actually has any merit, in my opinion. So I'll leave it at that to see what other members think and come back to that if we continue the debate. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Tomlin. Councillor McCormack.
I would be inclined to move with a number of doubts, but one of which was expressed by Councillor Tomlin. It's not isolated, but I think there may be the other reasons for refusal 2 and 3 may have weight, in my mind at least.
Okay, so we have Councillor Tomlin.
So in terms of 3, the highway safety, I mean, it's 3 dwellings. I guess there could be multiple cars leaving the dwelling. That's a fact. But that lane is already a busy lane, and in proportion, it's not going to actually add very much traffic to the lane. It's probably less than where that bungalow was in use, given the fact it's been used for dumping for many years. So I'm not convinced about the impact on there. And again, too, is whether you think it affects the local landscape. You have to drive the road to see the hedging, the tree line, and the stripped nature, because the land falls away down to a river or a brook or whatever they call it, and a tree line. So it's actually quite hidden from the road, and it is a road. It's not a lane in a farm environment. It's actually quite a major route between Bramley Corner and Silchester, so it's actually quite a road in that sense, and it does have narrow spots, but there are, I believe, tens of business units on the farm which have been allowed, so it's never had any highways issues, and certainly not in here from our highways authority. I don't know, it depends how we go, Chair. I'm quite happy to move for approval if I can find a seconder and we want to take it to a vote. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been moved for approval by Councillor Tomlin. Okay, before we go on, Mike wants to come in.
Thank you, Chair. It's just in terms of before the committee moves on to voting, just in terms of clarification. So I appreciate Councillor Tomlin may be debating the item as a whole, but there isn't a highways reason for refusal recommended in any case. I appreciate you going beyond that in other means. The 4 reasons for refusal stated are the isolated nature of the development and set out in reason for refusal 1, the size and scale of the replacement dwelling, and then the subdivision of the agricultural fields and domestic paraphernalia for number 2, the absence of a legal agreement to secure the affordable housing element because there's the site being over the 0.5 hectares, so effectively that is not secured. And then the 4th one, and this is just an important one to refer to, is that the issue there under the facing windows between, I appreciate you asked Mrs Downey the distances, and it's obviously extremely difficult when you don't have the plans before you to come to that position, but just in terms of the 50 metres stated, I think that's well in excess of what the distances would be. I mean, if I could just draw members' attention to page 162 of the application, where it sets out the distances. So, for example, it says in considering the relationship between plots 2 and 3, the dwellings are positioned with intervening distance of approximately 17.5 metres. So significantly different to the 50 metres stated. So just need to draw that to members' attention in terms of those distances.
Sorry. If I may come back, Chair? Yes. Okay, right. Well, thank you for pointing that out. It's 17.5 metres. That's still more than something we've allowed. So I'm not 100% sure that 17 is particularly worse than 14 or better. You know, it's about the same. So we seem to have accepted that one. So I wouldn't see that as a reason. I take your point certainly about the 106, and I guess that has to be a reason that has to be sorted out in our reasons for approval subject to, and so I would argue the proposal would not result in the dwellings in an isolated location. So it would be in accordance with our policies. Is it SS6, I think, is it? And I don't agree. I would say it doesn't cause sufficient harm on the amenity of each dwelling. So those would be the reasons I would go for, in accordance with SS6 and with that caveat of the legal agreement. Sorry.
Chris.
Thank you, Chair. So I think the Councillor Tomlin, I think the motion that you're putting forward then is that effectively you've come to a different view on the isolation point, and that you don't consider it to be an isolated dwellings in the countryside from that perspective, and therefore it doesn't contravene paragraph 79 of the NPPF about seeking to avoid isolated dwellings in the countryside, because that is effectively the flip argument, if you like. Effectively, to overcome reason for refusal 2, if I've understood what you're saying so far, is that you don't consider there to be an overriding impact on the landscape in terms of that subdivision of the plots and the additional dwellings. And then in relation to reason for refusal 4, your motion is effectively saying that you don't have the same concerns regarding overlooking, because even with those other quoted distances, you're still satisfied that they are appropriate distances. So they are the 3 effective reasons for approval on those elements. The one element, I think, in terms of the affordable housing provision, if the committee deemed it otherwise acceptable on those grounds, Chair, I think the only thing you could do at that stage would be to seek approval subject to that element being resolved.
Yes.
And effectively, if it wasn't resolved in some form, then it would have to come back to committee for consideration again. So you would need to effectively decide that you did want to include affordable housing provision in some form. And that may end up being an off-site contribution given the scale of development. It may be an individual property, but it would have to be met in some form as a prerequisite, if you like, to the release of any planning permission, should that be the way that the committee decides.
Yes, okay, I accept that, but it should be, if it's it's contrary to that particular policy, we need to resolve that, absolutely. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. It's been moved and it's been seconded, but I have had 2 more hands up. So, Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Chair. Just want to make a couple of points. In the update, it does say that on plot 2 and plot 3, okay, all windows on both sides to be obscure glaze. So I would have thought that would help reduce any potential issue with overlooking. I'm minded to follow officers' guidance. However, should the committee want to overturn that and approve it, I think there is a definite need for some legal agreement regarding the affordable housing. Okay, and I'd be very happy, okay, to put that as part of the motion, okay, for Councillor Tomlin's agreement to approve, and subject to agreement of that legal agreement, that it comes back here, okay, and we look at it again.
Come from Councillor Tomlin, because he is the proposer. Councillor Ganesh, you had your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. My questions had been answered by Mike about community infrastructure.
Thank you. I personally think this one is isolated. There has been a recent application not very far from this and looking very, very similar. A small plot of land, and that was one dwelling for the care of horses, and that recently went to appeal, and it was deemed to be isolated. And the inspector also deemed that our housing situation was not an acute shortage. So I will be supporting the officer decision. However, the motion on the table is to approve. So if we could do that in a show of hands, please.
Excuse me, Chair, can you just reiterate exactly what the motion is that we're being asked to vote on, please?
Certainly. The motion, as I understand it, is to approve the application subject to a legal agreement for affordable housing. And that will be delegated to the officers to agree. And should that fail, it will then have to come back to the committee for a redecision. Okay, so those in favour of approval of this application? And those against? 1, 2, 3, 5. I made that 7 for and 5 against, so the motion is approved. Officers.
Thank you, Chairman. As resolved, that application is approved subject to the agreement of a legal agreement for affordable housing. I would also recommend to members about adding conditions and informatives. And I do have a draft list if you would like me to run through those. Yep. So that would be subject to conditions securing the development to be in accordance with the approved plans, to commence within 3 years. The details of the materials would need to be pre-approved. That the parking for cars and cycles would have to be provided prior to occupation. That refuse provision need to be provided prior to occupation. That details of all landscaping and boundary treatments would need to be approved, along with a landscape management plan for the implementation and the longer term to make sure that the landscaping establishes itself. I would also recommend parking for construction operatives and deliveries to all be off the highway. To secure our water efficiency standards. To secure remediation works to tie up the contamination report to make sure we have remediation secured for when the site is developed, along with a verification scheme. A condition to secure the testing of any imported topsoil. A condition to secure construction management, environmental management plan to avoid harm to key protected species and habitats on the site, and also to secure a biodiversity management plan to manage and provide biodiversity enhancements. Details also to secure external lighting, for the relevant windows to be secured as obscurely glazed and high-level opening only. For tree protection, and just to highlight to members that 2 of the conditions would be pre-commencement conditions, so we would also need to seek the agreement of the applicant to include those. Then there would be standard informatives to ensure that the development accords with the approved plans and details, to ensure that, or to state that the council has acted in a positive and proactive manner, to secure an informative to seek opportunities to minimise the impact on climate change, to provide advice on securing a new postal address, to be mindful of the rights and, the obligations under the Wildlife and Countryside Act, to raise awareness of any further contamination on site would need to be appropriately addressed, and also to advise that part of the site falls outside of the red edge. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Is everybody on the committee happy to agree those conditions? I see no dissent, so I'll take that as a yes. Councillor Hussey.
want to speak as a ward councillor from the public speaking area. Okay. As long as you're not predetermined, as long as your mind's not made up, then you don't need to declare.
Right, thank you everybody. Item 6, Queen Mary's College. And Lisa.
Thank you, Chair. This is a Section 73 application for the variation of Condition 2 of BDB 72970 in relation to the car park at Queen Mary's College, Cliddesdon Road, Basingstoke. The application seeks to vary that condition to allow the car park to be available for unrestricted use on 4 days of any calendar year by parents and students wishing to enrol at the college before the start of the academic year, and to allow them to do so that the hours of the car park would be open between 8 in the morning and 7:30 in the evening. There's been on the update paper a slight amendment to the wording of the condition 2, just to ensure that it was just a typographical error on the second but last sentence. This is a repeat of the condition attached to the previous permission, but it should read, on those occasions when the car park is used outside of the core restricted hours, the car park shall not be used before 08 in the morning nor after 22:30. In the agenda it said 17:30, so that was an error. The recommendation is for approval.
Thank you, Lisa. There are no speakers, so questions to officers? I don't have any, so debate? I didn't really. Oh, Councillor McCormack.
Chair, I'm happy to move the recommendation. As I understand it, this is for involvement, and the hours of parking will mean that adult students who normally work will find it easier to enrol. So I have no problem with it.
Thank you. And in the absence of it, Councillor Court. You're seconding. Thank you. It's been moved and seconded for approval. Those in favour? Okay. I'll make that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I'll make that 10. 10. Thank you. That is approved. Councillor Hussey, I assume you're abstaining.
When I said
Okay. Well, it's approved anyway, so wonderful. Thank you. Right, item 7. We're doing well. Oh, sorry. Yeah, that is approved. And officers.
Yeah, just to confirm, the application is approved subject to the condition 1 in the agenda main paper and the amended condition 2 in the update.
Thank you. Item 7, Fairfields Road. And Lisa, again. Sorry, Lisa, before you do, could Nigel Rose come up to speaking position 1, please? And if you just wait there, Lisa will introduce it. Thank you. Lisa.
Thank you, Chair. This is a full application for the change of use of 4 Fairfields Road from a C1 hotel use to a sui generis HMO, house in multiple occupation, for up to 14 residents, including the demolition of an existing garage on the property. The site lies within the settlement policy boundary for Basingstoke and also within the Fairfields conservation area, and the building itself is a notable building within the conservation area. Just a small item on the update paper. Additional information has since been received, providing details that would have otherwise been addressed by a number of the conditions that are recommended within the main paper. On page 10 and 11, the amended condition wording and their relevant numbers are set out. The application is recommended for approval.
Thank you, Lisa. Mr. Rose, you have 4 minutes. There's a button on your microphone which will put the red light on, and I will warn you when you have 1 minute left.
All right. Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for the opportunity to speak in support of the application. The Planning Officer's report already accurately describes in great detail how the application conforms with all the Council's relevant planning policies. The report concluding that the change of use to a house of multiple occupation is acceptable. To arrive at this point, the applicant has worked closely with the Council's planning team. We have made adjustments along the way to address comments raised on the internal kitchen and dining requirements, and also revisions to the parking arrangements to ensure the current parking layout is in full compliance with the Council's current parking space standards. The current guest house contains 16 bedrooms, all with ensuite facilities, plus 4 bedrooms and ancillary space for the owners. It is therefore a simple construction process to convert this building into a 14-bedroom HMO. Minimal construction work is needed internally to create an additional communal kitchen on the upper floor, whilst the existing kitchen and dining facilities can be easily adapted for the new use. This change of use does not require any external alterations to the building, which will ensure the conservation area setting is preserved as existing. I know that no objections have been received from any statutory consultees. However, some residents have made comments on the application relating to the future occupants of the HMO. The Planning Officer has confirmed this is not a material planning consideration. However, I would like to add and assure the committee that the applicant, Pineview Properties, are an established development company with a number of similar retained HMOs in their portfolio. Prospective tenants are required to be vetted by the managing agents, which includes financial checks and guarantors where necessary as an integral part of that process. Comments have also been raised in relation to the collection of waste from the premises. The plans are identical to the arrangements already approved under the extant consent for the conversion of the building into 8 flats. The strategy for the waste collection process was agreed under a condition discharged by the Council's waste team in 2019 and again in an amended application in August 2020. The applicant may also consider putting the waste collection arrangement over to a private collection company who would arrange for the bins to be emptied and returned to the bin store on collection day. I understand this private arrangement is also used at number 2 Fairfields Road, which is immediately next door to the application site. There are no other registered HMOs in the immediate vicinity, and certainly none within 500 to 600 metres of the site, as confirmed in the officer's report. This change of use will therefore add to the range of living accommodation choices available in the area. The loss of the guest house itself has already been accepted and established under earlier approvals. Guest houses do not fall under any policy protection, and the guest house has only employed 1 person for a short period of time within the last 8 years, and there's been no one employed during the last 4 years. The reduction from the existing 16 guest rooms plus ancillary accommodation to 14 rooms will mean an overall reduction in the number of occupants of the building. So to conclude, Chairman, the application has been closely developed in consultation with the planning team, and revisions to the proposals have been taken on board during the process. The proposals will have an efficient construction process and make the best use of the building without affecting the conservation area setting. The officer's report confirms that the proposals accord with all the relevant planning policies, and I hope members are also able to support the application. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Questions? I've got one. I'm slightly confused. On your floor plan, first floor plan, you've got a communal lounge with no door to it. The only access to that lounge is from the lower lounge via the stairs. So somebody who's living on the second floor has got to go down 2 flights of stairs along a corridor into the downstairs lounge and then come up the stairs to get to the communal lounge, which I think was also described as a quiet lounge. Can you explain that to me? Could you put your microphone on, please?
Yeah, sorry, that was a later revision to the plans. That the area at the bottom of that drawing was originally or is currently the owner's living accommodation, which originally wasn't included as part of the proposal, but then was added in. So that it's probably just a quirk of adding that in later on, rather than thinking that through as part of the whole original proposals. But again, in planning terms, it's just an internal change that could quite easily be made.
It just mystified me, as you can imagine. Any questions? No? Thank you, Mr. Rose. If you could return to your other seat. Right, questions to officers? No? Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a quick one. How many other HMOs are in the locality within, say, I don't know, 500 metres or so?
I don't know the exact distances or where they are, but suffice to say that there are none within the immediate area in Fairfields Road itself. And you'll note from the report that the environmental health team have also looked at this in terms of meeting our borough standards in terms of HMO requirements, in terms of occupancy to the facilities, and also space sizes.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I see no hands, so we will go to debate. And I still see no hands, so I will propose it from the chair. Do I have a seconder? It's been proposed and seconded for approval. Those in favour? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'll make that 8. Thank you. And those against? And abstentions, in that case, there are 3. That has been approved. Lisa.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So the application's been approved, subject to the conditions in the main agenda with the amendments set out in the update paper.
As far as that's it, isn't it? Thank you very much, everybody. And first one done for the new ones. And yeah, thank you all for your input, and we will see you all in a month's time.